Hi, welcome to Asian American Life. I'm Ernabelle DeMillo. Gong Hei Fa Choi. Happy Lunar New Year. It's the Year of the Monkey, and the Museum of Chinese in America is ringing in the new year with a lion dance with the lion you see above me, which symbolizes good luck and fortune. This month, they're also hosting numerous events from family festivities to music and art performances. Along with celebrating Lunar New Year, the museum also houses one of the largest collections of Chinese American history. Let's take a closer look. The museum, designed by architect Paul Lin, chronicles 160 years of Chinese American history. Each section highlights their experience, from the struggles of early immigration and racism to their achievements and influence in America today. Now let's take a look at some of the latest Asian American headlines, and be sure to follow us on Facebook at Asian American Life. Japan and Korea's deal on comfort women. Is it enough? Minnie Roh has the latest. Race-based college admissions. Paul Lin looks at one of the Supreme Court's biggest case. High-stakes testing. What does it take to get into elite high schools? Kyung Yoon has the answers. We start our show with an update on Japan and South Korea's agreement over the comfort women dispute. We have more on this controversial deal.
I'm Minnie Roh. In May of 2015, we reported on the crusade of 53 elderly South Korean women, former comfort women or sex slaves of the Japanese military during World War II. These women have been demanding an apology from the Japanese government for decades for these war crimes. At the end of 2015, the Japanese did finally issue an apology from Prime Minister Shinzo Abe, along with a compensation package of $8.3 million for the victims. But this announcement has sparked even more controversy and resentment.
당신 누구예요? 누구예요?
The fury in this woman is evidence of 70 years of pent-up anger and frustration. Lee Yong-soo, a former comfort woman, lashes out at the South Korean vice foreign minister as he attempts to explain the terms of the settlement. To fully understand her pain, we need to go back to the early 1940s, when she says she and other teenage girls in Japanese-occupied Korea were being snatched off the side of the road by the Japanese military.
I kicked my feet and said, "I'm not going."
Even though it's been over 70 years, Lee Ok-sun still remembers that day vividly. The day her life changed forever.
One took my hands, the other my feet, and threw me up. I was thrown up high, and I fell hard.
It was 1942, and Lee was just 15 years old when she says she was kidnapped and taken to a so-called comfort station or brothel and forced to have sex with Japanese soldiers multiple times a day.
In one day, we have to serve 40, 50 soldiers. Think about it. How many hours are in a day? How would we take care of 40, 50 people? It would have been better to die.
Via Skype, I spoke to Lee from her residence, Nanumejip, or House of Sharing, which is also a museum and memorial to former comfort women. Despite her advanced age, she recalls with great clarity the horrors she witnessed so many years ago.
Those girls refused to entertain the soldiers and wouldn't listen. They would line them up and slash them open with a knife. What else but blood would come out? I don't call it a comfort station. It was a slaughterhouse where they murdered people.
Historians estimate that there were about 2,000 comfort stations across Asia and up to 200,000 comfort women during World War II. The bulk of them Chinese and Korean, but there were also Burmese, Indonesian, Filipino, even Dutch and Australians. Documents and testimony by former soldiers suggests that the Japanese military was involved in this large-scale sex slavery, perversely as a way to prevent rape crimes and venereal disease during their troops' deployment. Japan has continued to deny any coercion, saying the women voluntarily entered into prostitution due to poverty. Then, just before the new year of 2016, the global media exploded with news of a landmark breakthrough.
安倍内閣総理大臣は日本国の内閣総理大臣として改めて
Prime Minister Shinzo Abe expresses his sincere apologies, offers an $8.3 million compensation package to the victims, and the Japanese and Korean governments agree to put this issue to rest once and for all. After more than 20 years of weekly protests by the women in front of the Japanese embassy in Korea, it appeared this painful chapter in these women's lives could finally come to a close. Instead, it had the opposite effect.
사전에 먼저 피해자를 만나야 될 거 아니에요. 이렇게 한다고 이래 한다고 알려줘야 될 거 아니에요.
네.
모른다고 나이 많아서 모른다고
아닙니다. 그런 건
무시하는 거예요.
아닙니다.
내 인생을 살아주는 거예요. 아니잖아요.
그럴 리가 있겠습니다.
그럼 미리 얘기해줘야 될 거 아니에요.
얘기를 미리
이렇게 뭐 역사의 산지면이 이렇게 살아있는데.
The biggest problem is that the victims were excluded from the negotiation process.
Phyllis Kim is the executive director of the Korean American Forum of California, an advocate group for the comfort women.
This was a crime against humanity, and this was viewed as a women's rights issue because it was related to the sexual violence against women during military conflict. As the victim has the right to be included in any kind of negotiation that will resolve this issue.
Kim says the women have been unwavering in their demands for the past 2 decades. They want a formal acknowledgement that the Japanese government was responsible, an apology, legal reparations, a full investigation followed by punishment, and finally education and memorials built to remind the next generation of the atrocities that had occurred. None of these demands were met.
Even though there was an apology from the Prime Minister Abe, it did not come from directly from himself as the Prime Minister of Japan. And the content of the apology is very vague. It did not explicitly acknowledge the state responsibility of Japanese government.
In addition, Kim says we should not forget that comfort women are not just Koreans, but victims from many other nations who were excluded from this accord.
We should consider the accord that was just struck by the both government null and void and start a renegotiation with the Japanese government on one side and all the victims from 11 different countries on the other side, represented by the advocate groups and the professional negotiator, so that their demands are reflected in the negotiation process.
Every Wednesday for the past 24 years, the women have been protesting in front of the Japanese embassy in Seoul. On the Wednesday following the news that Prime Minister Abe had apologized, it was the largest one to date, with 1,000 people in Seoul showing up and timed protests taking place in 12 nations and 45 locations across the globe, including Kim and her group in Glendale, California, New York, San Francisco, Tokyo, Toronto, London, Paris, and Munich. These women say they will not rest until their dignity has been restored, if not for themselves, then for the memory of those who went before them. As part of the accord, the Japanese also requested the removal of the bronze girl statue in front of its embassy in Seoul, a request that the women refused to acknowledge. I'm Minnie Roh for Asian American Life.
I'm Paul Lin. Affirmative action in college admissions. Does it work to diversify the student body, or does it keep qualified applicants from getting in based on race or ethnicity? That's the battleground a divided U.S. Supreme Court faces right now. And campuses all across the U.S., like this one, will feel the aftershocks.
Whenever these issues come before the Supreme Court, there is at least the potential that the court, through a stroke of its pen, could change affirmative action completely.
He's talking about Abigail Fisher, the white plaintiff who's suing the University of Texas at Austin, alleging racial discrimination after being denied admission. The case first went up to the Supreme Court in 2012.
Abigail Fisher's race, white, was held against her, whereas other students, even though they had lower test scores, lower class rank, the fact that they had race in their favor allowed them to get in instead of Ms. Fisher.
Now the Fisher reverse discrimination case is back before the highest court in the land, even as reports of racial tension rise across the country.
When I look at the complaints of some of the campuses today, they're raising issues of how students of color are treated. That is, what is the racial climate and environment on those college campuses? And these are almost exactly the same issues that we were raising 35 and 45 years ago.
Good should know. In the 1960s, he was among student activists at Northwestern demanding an increase in enrollment for African American students at a time when they accounted for less than 1% of the student body. While college demographics today certainly show more diversity, at least in overall student numbers, racial incidents persist.
So it's kind of shocking that these institutions have not changed more, adapted more to the times than they should have.
Asian Americans are caught up in it too. Even though most surveyed support affirmative action, the headline suggests that Asians are divided. Last year, an Asian American student filed discrimination complaints against Yale and Princeton, and more than 60 groups filed a bias complaint against Harvard, claiming that it holds Asians to higher standards than others. Harvard faces a lawsuit on similar grounds from the Project on Fair Representation. This legal defense group is behind the Fisher case as well. The cases allege that when universities consider race in college admissions, it discriminates against students who might otherwise merit entry. Why some Asian Americans would support the dismantling of affirmative action speaks more to their frustration that even with high qualifications, more Asians aren't getting into top schools.
These Ivy League schools are seen as the gateway to power in America. These half-dozen schools are the basic feeder schools to entree to the top levels of government, business, and industry.
It's not that there aren't a lot of Asians getting into Ivy League schools. 27% at Columbia, 22% at Princeton, 21% at Harvard, and Asians make up less than 6% of the U.S. population. But some argue that the Ivies limit the number of Asian Americans despite their accomplishments.
I do not believe that highly selective colleges have quotas for admissions, but that doesn't mean that when they're not reading your application that they're not judging one Asian applicant against the next.
Taylor's College Advisory Service suggests that if Asians appear too similar on paper, top SAT scores, GPAs, and musical talent, then the bar is set that much higher to impress highly selective schools. His clients pay into the hundreds of thousands of dollars for coaching in order to stand out. By the way, it's not enough just to play an orchestra.
How do you gauge one great violinist from the next? You can judge a great swimmer, a great 100 backstroker from another great 100 backstroker. If one guy goes at 55 and one guy goes at 58, 55 guy is faster. But for a violinist, who's better? Admissions officers don't know. They're not violin experts.
With excellent academics as a threshold for Asian American applicants, Taylor says they need to build on that, and sometimes that means shining in ways that may not seem especially Asian, so colleges will notice.
They're really looking for the recruited athlete to help their baseball team. They're looking for the great science researcher, the one who's won the Intel Science Talent Search semifinalist.
So Asian American applicants can benefit from knowing what achievements to promote on top of already high qualifications. But how did Asian students get to be so good anyway? Research at Queens College shows it's more than just perception. While it's not necessarily economic advantage or better cognitive ability, research finds Asian students have a higher motivation level driven by immigrant heritage.
Immigrants are different than natives in that they are more motivated, they're more optimistic, they're more likely to believe that there will be a payoff to their efforts. And so the immigrant experience, it is an important factor.
It's also why some have sided with opponents of affirmative action. Immigrants, says Professor Shin, believe in a meritocracy. You rise to the top because of hard work. That works as an opinion, she says, but not a reason to bring down affirmative action. Inequities still exist for people of color, including Asians, and that goes beyond higher ed.
When you compare Asians and whites with the same level of education, Asian Americans make less. And so affirmative action is an attempt to redress institutional racism, discriminatory practices. And so I think it's not in the interest of Asian Americans to oppose affirmative action, and I think it would be very short-sighted. The Asian community understands this. This is why the vast majority of Asian Americans actually support affirmative action.
Asian Americans have come out both for and against Abigail Fisher in amicus briefs filed with the Supreme Court. The Brookings Institution, a think tank based in Washington, D.C., notes 117 briefs from Asian groups in support of Fisher, but more supporting the university, 140. In fact, briefs supporting affirmative action outnumber those that don't by a margin of 3-1. However the Supreme Court rules on Fisher, there are precedents on how to increase diversity without race-based affirmative action, and indeed many legal experts are getting ready for that day.
Changes need to come, and I think changes will come. Regardless of what happens with the Fisher case, if Fisher leaves us with a little bit of affirmative action left, it's only a matter of time between that small amount that's left will also come under attack in another case.
Public universities in 8 states already ban affirmative action, but employing new strategies has shown measurable growth in diversity, whether from percent plans, like one used by the University of Texas, that guarantee admission to top-performing students, to consideration of economic hardships, better financial aid, and recruitment of underserved students, as well as dropping admissions preferences for wealthy alumni donors. Beyond a change in the way universities promote diversity, some suggest that Asian Americans shift their attitudes about what makes a school worth attending and consider more than just the 8 coveted but highly competitive and expensive Ivy League schools.
There are ones that don't get as many Asian applicants, and they should. I wouldn't say that they have a dearth of Asian American applicants. They're not as in demand as African American or Latino applicants, but there's not as many. And when so many apply to the same 2 or 3 schools, well, those applicants have tough odds at those schools, where they'll have tough odds at other schools, but not as tough.
We're killing ourselves to try to get into a handful of elite schools, when really getting into those types of schools doesn't really matter in terms of, the types of jobs you get and the type of life you will live.
Diversity issues in college admissions and how policies need to evolve going forward. I'm Paul Lin for Asian American Life.
I'm Kyung Yoon. Since the early 1970s, a single entrance exam has been the gateway to New York City's specialized high schools. Critics say that the test affects diversity in these schools that are now predominantly Asian. Proponents say that the test is merit-based and that changing the criteria will lower quality. We'll take a look at the controversy and whether the system is fair or foul.
15-year-old Inri Gonzalez is a sophomore at the prestigious Stuyvesant High School in Lower Manhattan. The school is less than 10 miles from his home on West 155th Street in Washington Heights, but he says it's a world away from the neighborhood where he has grown up.
It's changed my life a lot, to be honest. Like, you would go to schools around here all the time, and the difference between me actually getting into that school and coming from one of these neighborhoods.
Each year, about 30,000 8th and 9th graders take the specialized high school's admissions test in the hopes of nabbing a seat at one of the 8 elite public high schools in New York City, including the top 3, Stuyvesant, Bronx Science, and Brooklyn Tech. The stakes are high. Admission is based solely on how the student scores on the 2.5-hour exam, and only about 1 in 6 will be offered a spot. Many students spend months, even years, prepping for the test. Inri's mother says she found a free test prep program for low-income students. She says the chance to go to a high school like Stuyvesant, where 25% of the graduates go on to Ivy League or comparable colleges, has been a life-changing opportunity for Inri.
And especially when you are coming from a minority community, you are as an immigrant, you are poor. You want that your kids, as a mother, I want that my kids, they get success in this country.
But for the majority of Black and Hispanic students, the odds of getting into a specialized high school are not good. Although they constitute 70% of public school students, only 5% of students admitted to the specialized high schools are Black, and 7% are Hispanic.
As a country, we have figured out how to systematically feed kids into a prison system, and we've also systematically been able to see how we can feed kids into elite athletic things. And one of the things that I believe we have not been able to figure out is how to find extraordinary diverse talent that just happens to be living in low-income and underrepresented communities.
Critics of the test, who include New York City Mayor de Blasio, say the system favors those who can afford expensive test prep. But the demographics tell another story. It's not the affluent white students, but Asian Americans, many of them low-income immigrants, who are acing the test. At Stuyvesant, Asian American students make up 72% of the school.
And I think it's just this notion of equity, or equality in society.
Filmmaker Curtis Chin's new documentary explores issues of race, equity, and socioeconomics and how they impact educational opportunities. The film follows a diverse group of 8th graders as they prepare to take the test that could make or break their future.
At school, I'm really trying to get those A+s, trying to be an honor roll, to be valedictorian. I have to get into a good high school, and right now my school offers a program where we get to go to Stuyvesant, a specialized high school, and get tutored. So I'm taking that opportunity and I'm studying to get into Stuyvesant.
I want to go to a high school where some of my friends are going, and I know many of my friends are really smart and they're going to get into specialized high schools. So I want to go to those schools, the good schools.
Our film is called Tested. And some people approach it thinking like, oh, it's going to be about standardized testing and, the pros and cons of it. But really, for me, Tested is about our country, and how we are treating each other, and are we equally providing opportunities for everybody?
One solution offered in recent years by some New York State legislators has been to introduce a bill to replace the test with more holistic admission criteria, like grades, attendance, and service activities. But Inri's mother disagrees.
One-day tests make a lot of difference and can be changing your life, your future.
I've been living here for like 15 years. It's like, why should I see myself, I don't know, 5 years from now or 10 years from now living in the same place? I want to change the way I live, And the test, it's going back to that, it gives kids like me an opportunity for that.
So you would say that the test was a life changer for you?
Yeah, honestly, yeah.
But for the majority of New York City's public school students, such educational opportunities continue to be out of reach. Curtis Chin says the debate over the test obscures the larger issue that most public schools are failing to provide a decent quality education.
Regardless of how you feel about this admission policy, right? Because ultimately, it's only going to affect a couple hundred more kids that get into these 8 specialized high schools. The bigger problem is that you have tens of thousands of other kids who are going to really bad schools. And ultimately, the real solution to this problem is improving the neighborhood schools, improving other educational opportunities for these families.
The bill to eliminate the test as the sole criteria for admission was defeated in the New York State Senate in spring of 2015. So for now, the standardized test remains in place for at least another year. But advocates on both sides vow to keep the issue front and center. I'm Kyung Yoon for Asian American Life.
So this piece allowed me to get a glimpse into the way that colleges go about choosing who gets in. And certainly diversity is a huge issue, and what happens to affirmative action is a big issue too. But I mean, people are really getting creative as far as how things could be better. Ivy Leagues acts as a channel for success and leadership in this country. So that really kind of raises the ante on why people want to get in.
So my story this month was about was a follow-up to the story that I did back in May. And I think what makes this particular thing different is that the internment camps and the Holocaust, those governments acknowledged and said, we were wrong, we are going to prosecute these people, and we are sorry, and here's reparations. And the Japanese government is skirting around this issue, and they're saying, we feel very sorry, but they're not saying this comes from the prime minister or the emperor, that we are sorry for what our government did back then.
That's our show for now. Be sure to stop by the Museum of Chinese in America to check out their Lunar New Year celebrations and their cultural exhibits. And tune in next month. We'll take a look at innovators and leaders in technology. And be sure to follow us on Facebook at Asian American Life. I'm Ernabelle DeMillo. Happy Lunar New Year.